Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Art Inside the Craft podcast. I'm your host, Jeremy Glazier, and today's episode is with a singer-songwriter based right here in Iowa, Dan Tedesco. I interviewed Dan for my video series right after his album American Darkness dropped in 2019. And since our last conversation, he's created the revolutionary Dan Tedesco music channel. I wanted to check back in with Dan to see how he's been managing the pandemic and get more information on how the music channel functions. We discuss each of those topics as well as new music and possibly reimagining some older albums in a newer and fresh way. Here is my interview with Dan Tedesco. Okay, great. So I wanted to get you today on the show, Dan, to catch up from where we left off with our last interview that we did in June, which is available on AmericanaHighways.org, and also on AmericanaHighways.org is the album review that I did for you for the last album, American Darkness. So just kind of give us a Cliff Notes introduction into who you are. And I don't think I actually have ever asked you this, but were you born and raised here in Iowa, or what's your story here?
No, I actually was born in the far west suburb outside of Chicago by the name of St. Charles, Illinois.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and I grew up there and lived there basically until college. And I left Illinois when I turned 18 to go to Arizona State, and I was a jazz performance major on guitar.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, a lot of people don't know.
I didn't know that.
It's not really the style of music that I play, although it definitely still informs a lot of what I do. But
sure.
Yeah, I was heavy into jazz for a good 6 or 7 years, right towards the end of junior high, going into high school, and then up into the first couple of years of college. And then so I went to Arizona State, and I was there for 4 years, and then I moved out to California and lived in LA for what ended up being, I originally went just for a couple of weeks to check it out, and it turned into being there for, I want to say it was just over 18 months, somewhere between a year and a half to 2 years.
Interesting.
Yeah. And then I left LA and came back to Chicago and lived in the city proper for about 7 years, and then went to Nashville for a year, and then came here to Iowa.
Wow.
So I've been in Des Moines now since 2014. But yeah, I've bounced around. I've bounced around quite a bit from the time I was 18 until really my early 30s.
Yeah, a lot of traveling.
Yeah, I've been to a lot of the country.
And so when we, like I said, when we met up, we kind of were discussing a lot of the new album at that time, which was American Darkness. And so with that album, that puts you up to what, 5 albums now?
Yeah, I think it's five full lengths, and then there's 2 EPs, and then I've also got something like three or 4 singles out as well.
Okay. So after we finished up our interview and took off, how did the rest of 2019 go with your album release and playing out and stuff like that?
Yeah, do you remember exactly when we did our interview?
It was June, I think.
Yeah, I think it might have been, I don't know if it was right before, because the album release the date was May 10th, but I know I started the tour at Woolies on June 1st, and I was trying to remember if I was with you before or after the tour actually started.
I think it was shortly right before, because you might have even been dropping off albums down at the Analog Vault. So
yeah, that sounds about right. My guess is it was probably somewhere right in that first week or 2 of June.
Yeah, very cool.
Because I do remember dropping those albums off. You're right about that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the rest of 2019. That album was really well received. I was lucky enough to get some airplay in stations like The Current up in Minneapolis, and actually another really cool station out in the San Jose, San Francisco area.
Oh, cool.
But I got some really nice reviews written up for it, and I mean, almost more importantly than any of that stuff, I've gotten really, really nice feedback from a lot of fans that knew me before that record, and then also a lot of new fans that came into my world because of that album.
Yeah.
So it was, and the shows were fun. I did the kickoff night of the tour was at Woolies, and I did that. It was sort of it was a full band show, but it was sort of an augmented version of a band. It wasn't your traditional sort of like bass guitar, electric guitar, keyboards, all the traditional kind of a setup. It was myself on acoustic, and then I had two female vocalists and then a drummer. And
Wow.
we did it without bass, and the drums were something where I tried to strip them down to being almost more like a certain feel or tone versus an actual like timekeeping element. Because I tend to play very rhythmic because I spend so much time playing solo.
Yeah.
And so when I do play with drummers, it's always a little bit of a struggle to find the right relationship that I'm happy with, because I don't like to give up too much of what it is that I do, but I also like the impact of the drums.
Right.
So that setting was an interesting show, and I'd like to maybe pursue some more things like that at some point when we get back to a place where we can do more of that regularly again.
Yeah.
But that show was cool, and then things rolled out from there. I mean, I went from most of the country, from the west to the east. I had some dates. I'm trying to think I'm trying to remember what I did at the end of 2019. I know I was around the Midwest quite a bit. I know I went out to California, and I'm trying to remember what else happened there. I think I know at the beginning of 2020, I was supposed to go out to the East Coast and do sort of a leg out in that region, and it just never happened. I mean, I got to the Southeast. I got down to Nashville and Charlotte and the Atlanta area, and then the dates that were supposed to be out in the Northeast were they were in March, and they were all canceled. So the unfortunate thing with that tour is the first the first 6 months or so, things were going really well. I had a cool thing planned for the spring of 2019 here in the Midwest, where I was going to do, I think it was like 5 or 6 full band shows to kind of mark coming up to the year mark of American Darkness's release. And again, those were all supposed to be in April and May, and they all had to be postponed, or at this point basically canceled, because now what happened with that record, unfortunately, was everything got shut down in the middle of its run.
Yeah.
So I only got a solid 6 months or so, and then I released a new EP at the time called Who Knows How Long This Will Last, which came out in January of 2020. And that was actually, well, it still is very much a companion piece to American Darkness. So the idea there was the record came out in the middle of 2019, and then I put that EP out right around the 6-month mark to sort of reignite things and just continue on that whole project.
Yeah.
And a month and a half after that came out, or 2 months after that came out, everything fell apart.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, some of the momentum on the tail end of that whole release just got demolished. But what can you do? Like this has been there's nothing there was no way of planning for that. So.
Right. And once COVID kind of hit, how quickly, it's interesting because everybody's kind of, at that point we didn't really know kind of what was happening. So once that hit, how quickly did you transition to kind of finding a different or alternate way to make a living, basically, with the music?
I'll back up to right before where that question kicks in, because I have kind of an interesting story about even just how quickly things happened and how quickly they changed.
Yeah.
So a year ago, we're talking right now at the very beginning of March, a year ago on what was leap year, 2/29 of 2020, I was outside of Chicago. I had a really great show there. And then I came back to Iowa, and I played with another Midwest songwriter who you probably would know, Chicago Farmer.
Oh, yeah,
and
definitely.
Yeah, he and I played in Davenport at the Redstone Room. And I remember talking to the talent buyer there that night. And I was like, are you guys, this was now the first week of March. So basically a year ago from right now, it was like March 6th. And I was like, are you guys, nervous about things at all coming up? Like, have you had many people cancel? And she's like, no, not really. And I was like, well, I've been, thinking that maybe I need to reschedule some travel dates. And I remember asking her, do you think from a talent buyer's perspective, I would get in trouble for doing that? And she's like, well, I think, what's going on would probably fall under the act of God clause,
sure,
just like weather or something like that. I was like, yeah, I don't want to be overreacting, but I just feel like it doesn't really look like I should be maybe going out to like the East Coast and doing some of this stuff and traveling on planes. I mean, of course, you got to remember at the time, nobody knew very much about what was going on. So they were pretty bold moves that you made. That was just,
Yeah.
Now people might not be as concerned about getting on a plane, but at that point, just going outside was considered risky. I mean, taking
Yeah.
a package off your step or something. So,
Right.
so I was like, yeah. So I got a hold of a couple of the venues out east, and they were like, well, you're the first person that's really brought it up to us to be, actually want to reschedule or cancel, which if you want to, we totally understand, but, we're just going to see how things go. And so I did make the call to change those dates. And literally 2 days later from that phone call, they were all shut down.
Oh, wow.
So, I mean, it happened. And then people that I knew out in those areas that were like, man, I don't know, are you overreacting? A week later, they're like, no, you weren't overreacting at all. This is insane.
Right.
So it was an interesting time, that very end of February, very beginning of March, we're just trying to figure out what to do. And that was right around when like Pearl Jam had canceled their whole spring tour, and really, really big events were getting nixed, but smaller venues were feeling like maybe they would still be okay, and then everything just collapsed.
Yeah.
So to go back to your original question, so that happened end of February, beginning of March. I didn't go right into live streaming. I sort of just took a break for those few weeks in March and started to think about, what could I do? What are the different things that are options now? Everybody started buying up all of the live streaming cams for doing work at home. You couldn't buy like the cam links to connect the DSLR camera to your computer.
Oh,
Everything
yeah.
was gone.
Wow.
So I was able to use my phone, of course, but I have some other gear that would have, at the time I was like, well, I'd like to do this really full on if I can, from like just an audio perspective and a video perspective, but I couldn't get the gear. So weeks went by and we got towards the end of March, and I was like, okay, I'm just going to do a few of these live streams on my phone. I'll put them up on Facebook, and I just need to play. At that point, it was just like I needed to do something that resembled performing and playing. I didn't know what it would feel like doing a live stream, if there would be any of that kind of energy that you feel being on stage at all, because of course you're in this sterile room by yourself.
Yeah.
But the first one, people were really excited for it, and it got a really great response, and it was awesome to hear from people and just to communicate with everyone, even if it was just through comments. And I did actually feel, I mean, it was nothing like playing a real show, but it did feel good enough that I was like, I'm going to do some more of these. So I did like 4 in 1 week, like every other night. This was right at the very end of March, going into the beginning of April. And people were really supportive. Like they were sending money, which was unbelievable. And I got the idea to wrap my discography up into a download package that I charged, because everybody was in this financial stress at that point. Or I should say financial distress. And I decided to wrap it up into a package and just price it at whatever anybody could pay. And I got a little plugin on my website where someone could just choose. I could set it up so I could accept whatever. So some people paid $10 or $15. A lot of people paid $50 to $100 for it. It was
Wow.
It was a wonderful thing for both of us. I mean, it was very supportive for me, and it gave someone, at that time, my full catalog.
That's crazy. You were kind of that fast to come up with something like that,
Yeah, that was happening definitely within, probably a month of everything shutting down. If not even sooner.
And that's kind of something that I'm not sure that a lot of people understand about musicians like yourself. And we've talked about this before, is it's everybody kind of thinks it's like, oh, you're just out touring, you're making money. And it's not really like that. It's a job, and you really have to put a lot into it. So.
Oh yeah, man. Well, even the touring thing, just because you're out playing doesn't mean you're always making money. There's different elements of it. There's some things you do for the classic quote unquote get great exposure, which there is something to be said for that. But there's some, I guess you could say, strategic things that happen with shows where sometimes you don't make money, but you are developing or extending or expanding relationships, whether it be, with an audience or even with, promoters or something, people that, maybe down the road, it's a long-term, these are long-term relationships that you're working towards. So,
right.
So even being on tour it's not always, the rosy picture that people have in their minds. And that's why I made that documentary, which I don't know if you ever got to see, called Chasing the Lightning, which sort of shows very much the grassroots blue collar work and job that being an independent musician is when you go out there.
Yeah. And this pandemic is kind of, I think one of the good things about it is it's really highlighted how important it is for the support that artists and venues both need,
100%. And I think I said something almost verbatim to what you just said in an interview with Iowa Public Radio about it, where I was like, yeah, people I think have always understood that the arts are difficult, that musicians don't make a lot of money. But like you said, they see they're out touring, they're playing. They don't realize that it is so, from a business perspective, it is so undiversified. Yes. Where like you're all on, it is all shows or nothing. And you can hear people who are much more successful than I am, and they'll say, yeah, I sat down when COVID hit and looked at my income statements, and like 95% of my income was from touring and from shows.
Oh yeah,
and these are people that have like millions of streams on Spotify, things where you would think maybe they're still making some money off these other streams or other points of revenue and other sources, and they're really not. So COVID has definitely laid those things bare to the rest of the world to see. Mm-hmm. And I do think maybe that on some level people have become not just more aware, but it's given them a chance to connect a little bit more. I don't want to say empathize, because musicians aren't looking for you to feel bad for them or anything.
Right.
But just to have an honest perspective of what's really going on there, which might affect how you choose to support going forward, knowing like, okay, this is how this works, how it really works.
Yeah. I mean, like the average guy gets laid off, maybe gets unemployment or something like that. Whereas with a musician, it's just kind of, there's no money coming in.
It's crazy, man. And I mean, there have been some things in this last year by way of unemployment with like where they've opened up other tiers of unemployment to people that do things in like the gig economy and like into like sole proprietors and independent contractors that under normal circumstances would never have that open to them. And that has been a helpful thing for a lot of artists over the last year on a very basic level. But I mean, it's helped with, everything helps.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, it definitely, COVID was one of those things where I've always been bothered by the fact that so much weight is put on just playing all the time. And I don't mean, obviously COVID's nothing you would ever plan for, but even if you got sick where you couldn't play for a few months, or, you broke your arm or something happened where you physically couldn't play, there is nothing to fix to help with that.
Right.
There isn't like disability.
Yeah.
There isn't, because there aren't really very powerful streams of income that are outside of the performance spectrum. There's just nothing else going on. I mean, unless you have some significant publishing happening where you're getting like quarterly statements on like royalties from some publishing work, there's not much else.
Yeah.
So because that's always bothered me, I've always been thinking about what else could I develop? Is there some other way to make this work so that it not only takes the weight off of that percentage of so much being on playing, but also just gives me a way to connect with people better, so that it's people and gives people a way to connect with me better, and also to support me in some way. If they're not people that like to go to shows or they can't get out to shows, you're kind of cutting those people off from being a part of your world,
right? Because
they can't come to see a concert, but they might still be someone who really wants to be connected to what you're doing. So, with COVID going on and the forced break, it gave me an opportunity that I don't think I would ever give it myself, to slow down and stop and really think about those different elements. Mm-hmm. And, that kind of leads us into what you were saying, asked me before about, how quickly did you start thinking about other streams of income and other ways to make things work? Well, this went from the live streams to packaging my discography for that, pay whatever you want arrangement. And then, the next step was to really sit down and think deeply about this music channel concept, which I'd had sitting around for a long time. I mean, I originally made a hacked together version of it back in 2011. And then I put it to bed because it just wasn't working the right way. And there were some things about it I needed to figure out. But I mean, I thought about it regularly ever since then. And I just never quite had the time to sit down and really focus on it because there were always shows to promote or things. It just never stopped. So
yeah, always something else to do.
yeah. So the thing about COVID was not only did it give me the break to stop and really finally, do what I needed to do to get that rolling and get it developed, but it also slowed my audience down to where it gave me a chance to really get that in front of people. Because there weren't other things going on like sports. I mean, just everything was stopped. So you had an unprecedented amount of attention with people to be able to present something like that too.
Right.
So there were a lot of things that lined up where I was like, look, if I'm ever going to do this has to be like, this is the time. I will kick myself forever for not taking this opportunity to put it out there and at least just see what happens. So, I got things dialed in. I started putting it all together and working up everything from the functionality of it to what I wanted it to look like and the branding ideas and the aesthetic of it all, right around the end of May, early June, and chose to launch it at the beginning of July. And that was what happened. So, I mean, if you go back in this timeline again, like things shut down middle of March, live streaming for me started end of March, beginning of April. The package of my discography started middle of April, and by beginning of July, the channel was live. So it all basically happened within, around 3.5 months.
And can you kind of explain a little bit just exactly what the music channel is and what you're offering on that?
Yeah. So the music channel, which is, I guess, officially titled the Dan Tedesco Music Channel, I refer to it as the DTMC, is sort of a multimedia broadcast of sorts that is delivered by weekly email. So it borrows from a lot of different sources of inspiration. I mean, the weekly email concept is something that a lot of journalists and writers have been using for some time to connect with their audience.
Yeah, definitely.
Where it's almost like a blog post that goes out each week, linking to different things.
Yeah.
And so I took that approach and then used the linking elements of just hyperlinks from text in the blog to drive people out to audio to listen to and to video to listen to. And then I'm also embedding artwork and things like that in each email. So there's an element of it that, I use all unlisted private links on YouTube and SoundCloud right now.
Oh.
Okay. And so everything's, not seen by the public, but when you get the emails, it links you straight to everything. So you click the link to listen to a song, and within a couple seconds, you're listening to it. And the cool thing with SoundCloud is that you can also set it up and arrange to allow people to download. So you can download any of the music as well.
Oh, cool.
And I took the video portion of it, is primarily focused on what I call my From a House in Iowa sessions, which basically grew out of the live streaming that started last spring. And all those live streams from back everything's archived on there. So you can go to the playlist for the 2020 From a House in Iowa sessions, and you can go back and watch everything from March and April of last year all the way through the end of the year.
Wow.
And then there's a 2021 season now that has kicked off that started in January that's on there as well. And those come out every Monday night along with the broadcast. So it's a weekly series that comes out Mondays at 8 Central. And there's always a new installment of From a House in Iowa on there. And then the other portions of content that I'm releasing, which again is a whole other kind of concept and topic of conversation. So what I've done as far as releasing my music now with the channel, and this was one of the biggest things, I'm sort of getting at it backwards, but this was one of the things that really got me thinking about the channel in the first place years ago. I didn't like how records were coming out and being forgotten about within a year or two, or within a week or two, because of the way the content is just pummeled upon people.
Oh, it's constantly pushed out. Yeah.
Yeah. So I thought to myself, like, look, I love getting records. I mean, I love the artwork. I love the liner notes. I love all those pieces, but I don't like the timing of how that's released anymore, because I just don't think it's relevant to how people consume. Now people don't sit down with, when I say this, I'm not talking about the niche of people that are very into vinyl and that sit down and pour over records. They're still out there, of course.
Yep.
I'm talking about
I'm
it
one.
well, I mean, to some extent I am too, but I'm talking about the greater majority of
Right.
people.
Sure.
Which is, again, when you talk about that niche that you and I fit into, you can say it sadly, however you want to refer to it. It is what it is, but it's a small percentage of that greater percentage or that greater audience. So for me as a musician, like, I want to be connecting with the greater audience and also still have something that appeals to the people who want to go to that level. So what I started to think about was, like, instead of releasing an album all at once, what if I broke those pieces, the artwork, the liner notes, and the tracks themselves? What if I broke those out and put them out on like a timed release, the way that like a TV show or something, would come out, where it's all produced up front, of course, but then they trickle it out over time.
Right.
So, and then it builds in aggregate as time goes by. So what I did with my first EP on the music channel, which was something called Dopamine, and this started with day one on the channel back in July. I had the album artwork, but then I also worked with some different artists to do individual track art for each song. So each month, so once a month, I would roll out a new song off the EP, and then throughout that month there would be different content each week that sort of tied back into that track. So it might be some production notes on how it was made. There might be some things talking about the inspiration behind the song. Right. There might be a video of a performance of the track. There might be, I got into doing this thing where I had people who were on the channel with me, like, write in their thoughts about each song, and I would post those at the end and call it a voice from the crowd, and you could hear like what other people were taking from it. And so all of that would happen each month with each song. And then as the months would go by, you would have a playlist where that first song will be revealed. The next month, the second song will be revealed. Now you have those two songs to listen to. And then the third month, the third song would come out. So now you have three songs to listen to. So you could listen to each one, or you could listen to it little by little as the album basically was built right in front of you.
Wow.
So then at the end of it was a 6-track EP. So in December, the last track came out, and that completed the release. So when you talk about releasing a new EP, like, it started in July and it ended in December.
Wow.
Yeah. And all of that content came along with it. And again, that's how I'm releasing records now. So I'm doing another one at the moment that's a live album that I pulled from a live broadcast on Studio One with IPR back in 2018 with Iowa Public Radio. And it turned out really, really well. I was super happy with how I played on it. It was just, even when it was finished, I thought, like, this probably needs to be some sort of a live release at some point. Yeah. And so I thought this was a great time to do it. So starting in January, did the same thing. Now this one, I'm not doing the individual track. I mean, there's different things with each of these releases I'm going to approach, but it's functioning in the same way, where you have a song coming out each month, and there's other content that comes along with each song to sort of embellish it and give more depth to the release. Much in the same way, again, that you would get from sitting down with a record and seeing all that artwork and reading the liner notes and the lyrics and everything. I include all the lyrics and all the releases. So it's giving you all that same content, but it's just, I feel like it's reappropriating it for how people react, how people consume and interact and relate with things in modern day, which means giving up on some things that are very emotional topics for a lot of people. And as a musician, it's also not easy to maybe say, like, well, I'm not going to do it the way that it's been traditionally done. And it means you have to think about it differently. But I also feel like if you're trying to communicate with an audience, you have to communicate with them the way that they communicate. Otherwise, you're just sort of getting lost in history.
Yeah. And let me ask you this real quick too. Well, not real quick, because this is kind of an important point that a lot of artists that I talk to are tackling as well. So with all this that you're talking about, how much of this are you doing yourself, as far as like setting up your website, doing all those links and all that stuff? How much of that is you having to either learn those new skills or I guess have somebody do it for you?
Well, I have help from a good friend who's a web developer that's helped me with just the build out on my website, with the landing page for the channel and the subscription. plugins and engine that makes that all work. But I handle the weekly broadcast just through my email client. So it's really not any different than, I designed the email template and everything to look the right way. I built all the art up in Photoshop myself.
Yeah.
I do all the video editing from a house in Iowa. It's not super complicated stuff to do, but there are some skills involved. I edited my own documentary a few years ago, so I picked up a lot from doing that.
Right.
In terms of working with Premiere Pro. But I have other friends of mine that I've brought on. When I say friends, like in most cases, I'm paying these people. Mm-hmm. Some of them have helped me out at times and done it for almost no money or no money because they're just incredibly nice people. But right. We usually, it is something I technically hire them for.
Yeah.
So I've now got someone who I'm trying to do more work with on the video side, more for some promo and some music video work, but things that I want to have a certain look and feel to that I could probably do if I wanted to spend hours doing it, but I can't, and I'm happy to give somebody else the work and support them at the same time if I can afford to. So,
right. And I guess kind of the point that I'm pushing my audience to understand is that, like with you, there's not a big record label behind you who's saying, hey, Dan, here's a bunch of stuff that we're going to do for you. This is like creating your own career and your own,
Yeah, and to go even further with that, the other big thing that I've been, it's sort of all dovetailed because I wasn't planning on doing all this home recording and production work. But with the break last year, and when I was looking at putting out the channel and releasing that Dopamine EP, I had the songs recorded as like these rough mixes that I was going to do other work with at one point. But during the break, I started sitting down and working on them and learning a little bit more about mixing. And I knew what I wanted them to sound like, and I was starting to be able to get them to sound that way. And I sent them around to some friends of mine. I was like, I think this stuff actually sounds really good, but I don't know if I'm just saying that to myself, and maybe I should be sending this out to have someone actually mix it for me.
Sure.
But I really like the way it's sounding. And people wrote me back and were like, no, dude, this stuff sounds great. And then I sent it to a mastering engineer, and I was like, look, man, if the guy who mastered American Darkness for me, I was like, look, if you think this sounds bad or there's like a bunch of red flags, let me know. But I really feel good about these mixes.
Yeah.
And he was like, no, this stuff really does sound great. Like, I think you're in good shape here. And so then that came out, and then I put one of those tracks out as a single. So outside of the channel, just on the streaming sites. And I sent it up to The Current, who had played a track or two off American Darkness. And they picked one up for one of their weekly shows. And I was like, okay, well, these guys, this stuff is going toe to toe now with music that's being released on their station.
Right.
So that kind of built up my confidence a little bit more. And then I just started going a little bit more all in with just recording here at home. And now I've got half of a new record done. And I've been doing this other thing, some other projects that will come out on the channel at some point, probably the near future, that have been just recording projects here at home as well. And it's not that I'm trying to circumvent purposefully working with other people. Part of it is that I just can't leave home.
Right.
And I'm still trying to be creative, and it just seems to be working out. So, and I've been really enjoying it because, again, I can hear where I'm trying to get in my head. So if I can learn the techniques to get there, music 101 going forward is going to be like, if you can do it yourself, it's a big part of what makes it work because of the financial equation of all of this.
Right.
That's the other thing about, you go into the studio and you spend thousands of dollars of money and you get this product, which sounds awesome and you're really proud of. And there's no way to make money realistically. Yeah. Like how you get back an $8,000 record when streaming sites are paying you 0.03 of a cent per stream.
Sure.
And even a vinyl record, then you got to spend $2,000 or $3,000 to get it pressed. And then you have to sell X number of those just to make back the cost of the pressing, not to mention the cost of the recording that's on the pressing.
Right.
While meanwhile, all the people involved in that process all got paid.
Yeah.
That's the thing that's crazy to me, is like, you paid for the studio time, you paid for the record pressing time, but the audience doesn't have a realistic way to give you that money back directly on that record. So it's almost like music can be seen as a loss leader to get people to come to shows. And then hopefully the shows make back the cost of everything plus make a profit for you.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's how bonkers the business model is.
Insane.
So when you look at that, that's why like the channel to me helps to level that equation out. Because now what I do with the channel is everything I've just talked about that's on there is available, and it costs $100 a year flat for everybody.
Right. Yeah. That's
so it
great.
puts everybody into a bit. It's $8 a month, which I know I ask for it all at once, which looks like a lot more money. And
yeah.
It's just that the way the content's available and trickles out, I can't have somebody come on and pay $10 or $15 a month. And I didn't mention there's an archive section where there's a link in every email that takes you to the archive, and everything that's been released and all the back archive, like from House and Iowa sessions, my back catalog, like all of that's on there. So you could, in theory, if you wanted to sign up for, if I had it going for $10 or $15 a month, you could do that for 1 month. Go check everything out, download a bunch of stuff, and then just cancel your membership.
Yeah.
And somebody else paid $100 for the same thing.
Right. Yeah.
So I have to make it a fair thing. People have asked me, like, why don't you do a monthly thing? That's why.
Yeah.
So, and to me, $100 flat is not a lot of money. It is right now because people are fairly distressed still with everything economically. But in normal circumstances, I don't feel like it's overpriced or it's gouging anyone. And everybody I've talked to about it, unless they just don't want to say it to me, no one has flat out been like, that's too expensive. They've all said like, it's a totally great deal for what you're giving.
Yeah.
So that's how it works. And you just pay that once a year, and then it all comes to you. You don't have to go to the music channel somewhere. It's there every Monday night at 8:00 in your inbox. It will be there. So I like that element of it too, that it's not expecting people to have to go find it. And you don't have to like constantly spend money on social media ads to tell people to go to your channel. They just check their email and it's there.
Yeah.
It's like it's the one form of communication that you don't have to pay for at this point. So
right. So that's all great information about the channel and what you've been up to. So I always find it interesting how entrepreneurial musicians have to be, and how everyday people just don't see that side of it,
No, man, and it's so much more like that too, as in like even longer than I've been doing it, but the last 20 years or so, 25 years, it's become more and more that way, just because the industry has been so decentralized. I mean, so many things. There's so many pluses to it at the same time. I mean, a lot of the things that cause the same issues we're up against are what are allowing me to do all the work that I'm doing because of the technology and the accessibility of tools that you used to have to have someone with a big checkbook basically give you access to.
Yeah, and now you can just do it in your front room.
Yeah, and I mean, and it's a weird thing for me to talk about with the recording stuff. I mean, I'm not like a pro level mixing engineer and recording engineer with all kinds of crazy gear and knowledge and ability. Like, I have mad respect for the guys that work on that level. It's more like I'm the guy that knows how to build the car in my garage that I want to drive.
Right.
It's very focused to me and what I'm doing. And I mean, I don't, it works in that capacity. But if I wanted to do something outside of that realm at some point, I would absolutely turn to someone else and be like, look, we're going to go in the studio and knock this out.
Yeah.
But it's it's just a
necessary
very
at the moment.
Well, at the moment, though, I wouldn't be able to do anything. I'd just be sitting at home, and I would go crazy. So it's part of it is just me wanting to maintain creativity and keep working. So,
and how has I kind of go into with the creativity. So how has songwriting been during the lockdown? Has it been any different? I mean, do you kind of always write at home by yourself anyway?
Yeah, that hasn't changed terribly. I mean, the fact that I've been doing more recording means I have things set up to demo stuff a little bit more aggressively than I usually do. Like, a lot of times it's me recording into like a voice recorder app on my phone and just laying down scraps of things. But I have a little bit more gear set up now where I can sit down and within, an hour I could have like a little demo put together with even some other instrumentation on it. And so, like, fleshing out ideas and experimenting right off out of the gate. That's been a little bit different. And I think maybe I've been writing more regularly because I'm not in and out of my world here as much. Like, it's the being in motion. While there's a lot of things being out in the world and traveling and playing and meeting people, a lot of things that I draw inspiration from.
Mm-hmm.
in from those experiences that's not happening right now. On the flip side of it, I'm in one stationary spot, so I can focus a little bit more on writing than it definitely happens in smaller gaps, spread out more when I'm in my regular sort of schedule.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting how different artists kind of, some people that I talk to are like, nah, this is my life, man. I've been doing it this way from the get-go. So it doesn't
Oh yeah, I
bother
mean,
me. And other people are just like, I got to get out. I got to see people. I need to live
well,
those experiences.
the truth about music, and this isn't when you're again, everything's so focused with music talking about going out and playing, but when you're talking about writing and creating it, like actually making the records and making the songs, that work is incredibly solitary.
Sure. Oh, yeah.
So there's totally an element of what's been going on this last year that isn't any different, to your point. But I mean, it's exactly how but it's always been me in a room with a guitar or a piano just working on stuff. I mean,
Right.
that part of it is 100% happening all the time, COVID or not. But the traveling and getting out into the world thing, I mean, there's a bit of a suffocation happening from that, which I definitely feel. And I'm as anxious as anybody else to have that go away. So
Yeah. So let's go to right now. I think you have a new single coming out.
yeah,
Tracks on Fire,
yep,
and
and that's
just kind of wanted to see what's coming down the pipe. You talked about the live album that's coming out, but yeah, what else is coming through?
well after that, the single, this Tracks on Fire single, that will well. I mean, I'm just going to continue releasing the Live at IPR Studio One album on the channel, which started in January, and it's an 8-song record. So that will be rolling out all the way into August.
Great.
And after that, I'm in the middle, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, I'm in the middle of finishing up what I think will probably be another full length project of somewhere around probably 10 tracks or so. I've got at least half of that pretty well wrapped up at this point.
Great.
That I don't know if I'll have that come out this year. That might be more like the top of next year, just to give. I did back-to-back releases on the channel right off the bat. Like the Dopamine came out, and then the month that was done, the following month I started this Live at IPR record. I don't know if I want to have a little gap and maybe explore some other things to give a break from new music, just so that it's not so constant that I don't want to wear people out,
Right,
or desensitize them or myself to just putting out new music nonstop. I think there is something to be said for having a little break and build a little bit of anticipation again for both sides of that myself and the audience. So I'm still thinking about exactly what I want to do at the tail end of this year, but I do have this other project I've been doing a little bit of work on, which is something I'm sort of calling the Revisited. I don't know what I'm going to call it, Revisited something or another. I haven't titled it exactly yet, but it's going back and reworking old songs I've put out with different arrangements.
Oh, that's
interesting. And just because I do so much of that in a live setting,
yeah,
that I thought it'd be kind of cool to just maybe either, I don't know if I want to do it as like a special release throughout the year on the channel, or actually do like do a volume, different volumes of it, and do like have it be like an EP length where you do like 5 or 6 of them over 5 or 6 months, then go into something else, and then maybe have volume 2 like a year or 2 later, and just have it come out that way. Because I also do things on the channel, like since it's every Monday night, some months there's 5 Mondays, so that 5th Monday I try to do something a little special. Oh, yeah. So I've thought about maybe releasing a track from the Revisited project that way, so you get 3, maybe 4 of them a year, 5 of them a year that way, instead of doing them as a monthly focused thing. I don't know. Those are all things I'm brainstorming on. But
so that those revisited ones, that would be you basically laying down all new tracks, completely reworking it, re-recording it, and putting it out.
Yeah, and in some cases I've been bringing people on. Like I have one done for a track off my first album, and I got it. I have somebody play on it with me that was actually on the first album with me.
Oh, cool.
And then I have like another one I've done with my buddy who played guitar with me for a long time, and he played on the original record that we redid this particular track on, and he did like another lap steel part that he played on the original one. So I'm trying to tie it in from like a narrative perspective, where I'm working, if I can, with people that were parts of the original projects.
Oh, nice.
Even if it's just one person. So yeah. it adds this other kind of layer to it. And I, and there's all kinds of things to explore there. I mean, even American Darkness, man, like that album, I had a production idea for it when we were first talking about doing that record, of treating it sort of as like with this like 1960s Columbia jazz sort of vibe in terms of the sound of it, and even instrumentation wise, like having upright bass, having like a muted trumpet.
Oh, wow.
And I thought about even doing that entire album in that way, and having like the way that we originally released it, and then this sort of like alternate version of the entire record.
Oh, that would have been cool.
And then you could like and the way I was looking at it is like the album artwork is black and white.
Yeah.
So I inverted that artwork and got this like black with white. It's like everything's opposite.
Oh,
and I thought it would be kind of cool to have it as almost like you could do like a double thing where it's like version 1, version 2. And nobody really does that. And I guess in the traditional album cycle format, it doesn't really make sense to. But again, I'm working in this sort of uncharted territory where you can do whatever you want.
Yeah.
So I really like the freedom of like, if I wanted to do that, I could just do it. So.
Yeah, well, I mean, Sturgill Simpson just released a bunch of 2 albums of all of his stuff done in bluegrass style. So,
yeah, I mean, there you go.
Why
so
not?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's just, I mean, they're all good songs, and I don't think that there's any reason that you can't just redo it. I mean,
Sure.
It's not like I'm doing it because I thought it would be better. It's more like I just always thought these songs would have an interesting, they would just take on an interesting shade of their story by having that kind of subtext, with that style of music.
Yeah.
And I've thought about doing some live stuff with bringing some of those jazz elements back into what I do. I mean, some of the stuff I'm working on right now even kind of smashes some of those things together. So if I did put something like that out with American Darkness, I might have a band that could then play some of those things live also, which would be cool. So
yeah, I think if you did that, you would almost it's almost like putting out new music, even though it's stuff people have already heard. It's
it totally
is, fresh,
yeah.
And you might actually get some new fans who maybe a different style.
Well, that's exactly right, because those songs sort of teeter between like rock and some of the Americana flavors. This would go in more of like even more of like a folk sort of almost like an alternative like jazz territories. Because I want to get people on these things like playing on them, like open up like improv sections like you would in a jazz arrangement, and let them play in that sort of language, not where it has to be the traditional sort of scales and like let them really play.
Yeah.
So I think that there's some cool stuff there that would appease certainly my background and some of my interests that have not always gotten to see the light of day. So
yeah, man, that'd be really cool.
Yeah. So there's a lot going on. I mean, the next few years, and again, with the pace of how things come out on the channel, it allows me time, like just like when you drop an album, again, like after a few weeks, it's like it kind of falls by the wayside. And then maybe a year later, you put another thing out. Like this way, things just don't really ever stop in terms of what the audience is receiving and what you're continuing to work on within that given project to release to them, different pieces of content that are going out every week. But it also gives you this window to be working on new stuff. Just like I said, like with a TV show, it's like they're working on the next season while you're watching the current one.
Right.
So you kind of move into that way of thinking with the production schedule.
Yeah.
And then it gives you the time to really focus on those different pieces.
Yeah. I think what you're doing with the music channel is really innovative, and I've seen a lot of people put out like that they have Patreon accounts where people can kind of come in and.
I've seen no one do anything like the music channel.
But nothing like what you're doing at that level, I don't think. It's interesting.
No, the closest things I've seen still, if they haven't been Patreon based, which is actually what I originally thought about using until I figured out how to get around going through their system, which was a big part of the reason why it didn't come out sooner. I've seen people do like what to me feels more like a fan club or like a members only thing. And that's not really what the music channel is. It's not like a exclusive, you get this because you're on the channel. It's more, this is just all my stuff. Like if you get it, you pay for it to get it or you don't. Not unlike 30 years ago, if you wanted the record, you bought the record. It's the same concept.
Yeah.
So it's not like this is just for people, that it's like exclusive stuff. Like this is just all of my content that you give me a flat fee for the year and you just get it all.
Right.
It's a really simple deal when you boil it down. And then on the streaming sites, I put out a single every couple months or a single off one of the projects because there is a discoverability element to Spotify and all that I definitely value. And my hope is that people would hear something on there they might dig, and then maybe look up more of my info. And you don't have to go very far these days to stumble onto the channel and then learn about that. So,
Yeah, it's super
that's
cool,
the way.
man. I hope it's super successful, and
It's coming along, man. It's been more successful than I think in some ways I hoped it would at this point. I mean, with everything people are up against financially right now, there's a lot of people I've heard from that are like, I'm all about this as soon as I get back to working normal. Like it's a lot of that stuff, which I totally understand. So
I want to thank Dan again for taking the time to talk with me about the past couple of years and what it takes to not only continue to be a musician, but constantly innovate your art in new and fresh ways. I look forward to catching him at a live show very soon. You can follow along with Dan on all social media platforms, streaming services, and at dantedesco.com. His website also has all of the information on what Dan offers with his music channel and how to get signed up. I want to thank my sponsors, PureMountainCoffee.com and Black Cat Bone Productions, which can be found on Instagram, and I would ask you to follow along to see when new episodes will be available. Until the next time, I'll see you all down the road.